Hi, this is Chris Beall, CEO of Connect and Sell. We're going to be talking today about making sales development math work, the hidden power of follow-up calls. And I got lucky today. My friend Chad Burmeister, founder and CEO of ScaleX, is going to be joining me. And Chad is a master of making this power of follow-up calls come to reality. Chad, how's it going today?
Chris, it's great to be here. I thought math was good when I was in high school and college, and I never knew that it would actually pay dividends as a sales professional and leader of a company. So thanks for having me today.
It's great to be here. You know, we experienced this a lot. You and I worked together at Connect and Sell, and then you went on to do a whole bunch of other fantastic things, and now you're doing ScaleX and bringing really the power of math to the masses, I guess is how to put it, at scale. And to me, this is pretty exciting stuff to be able to talk about.
Well, I'm glad to be here with the professor. For those of you who don't know, Chris at one point in his life was a professor. So therefore, the math runs in his veins. So it's great to be here. Hey, if you want to reach us, please visit us at Twitter, visit us on LinkedIn. Chris's Twitter handle's there, Chris8649, and I'm at ScaleXAI. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. You know, for those of you who aren't familiar with artificial intelligence, AI is here to stay. And I saw a great post by John Barrows the other day when I posted about when will bots take over the world. And John said, AI is going to make good reps great, great reps unstoppable, and average reps irrelevant. And I couldn't agree more. Chris, does the math hold up to that statement?
It does, you know, and the key is it's about bringing the AI together with the reps. I look back at, you know, think about this. Jeopardy was finally won by AI in 2011. My guess is that a human and a computer working together could have beat Jeopardy on every single day from 1984 until 2011 and beyond, because people and AI working together can make magic.
I couldn't agree more. Well, this is an interesting image. I think it's probably a little bit shocking for anybody on the call now listening to this. I certainly don't believe that these bots will be doing SDR work. However, if you put the robot suit on the human, I think that's what I do envision happening. I'm seeing it happen already, right? There's customers that ScaleX is working with right now that we're delivering 500 to 1,000 sales activities per day for a single person, where Chris, traditionally, as you know, the analysts that follow the industry are saying the average is 50 to 75 sales activities in a day. Now, by leveraging technology, companies are able to see 500 to 1,000 for a single SDR or BDR. I think, if I remember back a couple of years now, the biggest day that I saw for sales activities was over 2,000. You may have recollection of what the actual number was in that one single day by a single SDR.
Well, I do. In fact, I remember we had this question on our minds as to how many dials and how many conversations in a day could even be achieved by one human being, no matter how you amped them up with technology. So we put a bounty on it and found out that somebody quite casually did 2,463 dials, the hardest of the sales activities in a day, and reported it was the best day of her professional life. But you know, what we're looking at today is the math underneath this. So I know you and I, Chad, have been dealing in the world of raw power, and raw power is a wonderful thing, but there's also hidden power. And in the world of sales development, there's a hidden power in the follow-up call that I find it somewhat frustrating that people don't always grasp. And I think it must be because it's two numbers multiplied together. Each one of those numbers is big for lift 3 times or so, but they're both kind of hidden in the reality of making follow-up calls.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And it's funny. Chris is a mathematician and I'm not. I'm a sales professional, and it takes us sales professionals years sometimes to understand the math. And we're here to help break this down today so that it's so abundantly obvious that by the end of this short session, you will walk away with the follow-up math. So let's start with this, right? Our good friends at Funnel Clarity, Tom shared this with us. And, the market, if you're cold calling the market and you talked to 100 people let's say normally it takes you, well, I don't know, 2 to 4 conversations a day times 20 days in a month. So that's 80 people that you talk to in a month. That means you might book between 3 and 5 meetings, right? Because you're lucky enough to find someone who's actively pursuing or interested in your product, and you happen to get there. And guess what? That's the math I've seen, no matter if I work at a company selling to IT technology buyers or HR professionals or almost anybody. It's just this math kind of holds up. And then there's another 40% of people who may be ready within the next 12 months or so. And then there's another half of the market who maybe they'll never be ready to buy from you. But at a high level, that's what the market looks like. Chris, any commentary on the funnel clarity chart here?
Well, there's an underlying reason behind this, Chad, which I think is worth thinking about. And that is most products, you think about a product, you know, no matter what it does, probably you're going to keep it for about 3 years minimum after you buy it. And so that means if you're trying to catch somebody in the quarter in which they're ready to buy a replacement for a product, you've got about an 8.5% chance of doing that. 3 years, there's 12 quarters out there, you know. So 1 out of 12, you got kind of 8.5% chance. And if you're really looking for those that just might not be buying but are actively buying, that's going to be a little less than half. And so that's why you see that 3%. And what I find to be very odd is folks look at this and they say, oh, well, I better get that 3%. And the answer is no, you better be first in line at that 40.5%.
Absolutely. And that's what we're here to show you. So check this out. This is a customer that, that I recently worked with. And notice when calling these folks across thousands of dials and conversations, the meeting rate per conversation was 2.3%. And this is not unlike any company that I've ever worked with. When I ran sales and marketing at Connect and Sell, I saw customers anywhere from 1% to 10 or 12%. So in this case, it takes 100 conversations to schedule 2.3 meetings. And the math on that is quite low. So when I started peeling back the onion with Chris and the client services team, I started to discover the power of follow-ups. So in fact, this is pretty amazing, right? I just showed you the 2.3%. When you extend it out even further over the course of a couple of months, it actually was lower than that, 1.76%. But on our follow-ups, when we had a conversation with somebody and then we talked to them again, our follow-up conversion from conversation to meeting was 15.38%. So if I'm looking at the math, 15.38 divided by 1.76, that's a pretty good multiple, right? You have more conversations that convert at a higher level. Why would you not figure out how it is you could be having more follow-up conversations to have these kinds of yield improvements? And I think the company ABCD, Chris came to my office in Denver a couple months ago and showed me these statistics and said, look, here's 4 other companies, company A, B, C, and D. And, you know, look at the 17.6% compared to the 2.85. Cold calls convert at a lower level and follow-up calls convert at an amazingly high level.
Yeah, and Chad, let's talk a little bit about what a follow-up is in this particular way of thinking about it. A follow-up is not a scheduled meeting, but it's also not a first conversation. So it's all those other conversations, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, that you have. And I know folks are frustrated getting people on the phone, and so they're even more frustrated at going back to follow-ups. And I actually think a lot of times the disruptive emotion of feeling rejected or neglected by the person you talk to because they weren't ready to take a meeting right off will keep people from doing those follow-up dials that it takes in order to finally get a follow-up conversation. And what I wanted to look into a little bit here is, well, what really happens at the dial level? So this is the conversation level. If you get that conversation, you could be 6 times more effective at setting follow-ups, or 2 times, or 3 times. Huge, huge lift. But there's another piece of math that's hiding in here that I think is worth taking a look at. Okay, so this set of calls here, what you see is an exhaustive analysis, and some people kind of go all eye chart on this, for which I apologize, but it's an exhaustive analysis of Connect and Sell's own activity in the month of October 2017. So if I took all of our dials, which was roughly just a little bit north of 90,000 dials that our team did, and that's a team of most days 7 SDRs and 5 AEs. The AEs are, I'll call them most days. You see how it breaks down, that 71.62% of those were cold calls and only 28.38% were follow-ups. Now, Chad, you know that getting a team to 28.38% follow-ups is quite an achievement, right?
Well, it is. And you know what's interesting? If you follow Chris Beall at all on LinkedIn, you see that he posts these charts all the time. And I really started to wonder. I thought he was fudging his numbers, to be honest. I looked at it and said, why is my team at 2 to 3% conversion rate? I'm a pretty good sales leader. I've been doing this for a long, long time. And I just finally cornered Chris one day and said, Chris, you have to tell me, what is different about the way your people, what's in the water, right? Where are they located? How are you training them? What is going on? And I said, you got to tell me, what percentage of your calls are follow-ups? And he told me between 40 and 50% of all of his calls that go out are follow-up calls. And that's where it clicked, right? I think of gas in the tank. If you put dirty gas in your gas tank, you're going to have pings and backfires, and it's not going to work very well. But when you can put clean gas in the tank, my reps, they love follow-ups. Guess what? When you call a follow-up, you have it reduces the time it takes to get somebody on the phone. So normally it might take 20 to 30 to even 50 dials to have a single phone conversation. Data's just bad in CRMs these days. And so when you force your salespeople to have bad dials where the person doesn't work there anymore, or it's maybe a bad phone number, maybe it's a fax line, who knows? It could be a number of things. But when you talk to them for the first time, then you know that person works there, you know their phone works, and that dial to connect goes from 30 or 40 or 50 to 1 down to, we found, an 11 to 1 or 10 to 1. So instead of it taking now, a very long time, a half a day to finally talk to somebody, by calling your follow-ups, you might only take you 10 phone calls. So that was just such a huge moment of understanding by partnering with Chris on how to figure out the math of follow-ups.
Well, and you see it really clearly, Chad, right here, where you look at that column that says dials under results, and it says 28 and change, 28% of the dials were follow-up dials, but 50% of the conversations were follow-up conversations, which is what I had mentioned to you, is when you get that follow-up conversation rate above 50%, real magic starts to happen, and it's because of two things. One is those dials convert. Those cold calls, as you see over under yields, converted only 3.56% of the dials turn into conversations, but 9.13% of the dials that are done on follow-ups, second, third, and fourth times to talk to somebody, convert to conversations. That's 2.56 times as many conversations per dial. And then you go over to the next column and you say, well, what happens with meetings? Wait, it gets even bigger. Now, I only have 50% of my conversations are follow-ups, but 67% of my meetings come from follow-ups. So in net, follow-ups are only 28% of the dials, but 67% of the meetings. And why is that? Because the meeting yield, that is, how many meetings do I get per conversation, also about doubles. So my follow-ups go up by about 2.56 times. My meetings go up per conversation by 2.03 times. I have 5.22 times as much value delivered per dial on follow-ups. And that is the hidden math.
Chris, I think it's the new term here is not 80-20 rule. It looks like the 30-70 rule in this case. 30% of your dials result in 70% of your meetings. I'm not going to play today, Chris, a phone call that demonstrates this, but I can tell you about it. I called this woman personally as the interim VP of sales of a company where I called into the head of HR. And she picked up the phone and she was kind of in a funny mood. And it was Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock. She said, Chad, this is a terrible time. I have to go. And I think a lot of salespeople would have downgraded that lead and thrown it back over the wall to marketing and said, hey, marketing, can you drip nurture this person? Well, I didn't do that. I actually scheduled a follow-up task to get her into the 70% meeting bucket. And a week later, guess what? Friday, same time, she picked up the phone. Hey, this is so-and-so. And I said, oh, hey, I'm glad I got you. This is Chad Burmeister. I'm the vice president. Did I catch you at an okay time? And she said, no, it's terrible. I'm heading out of the office right now. I said, well, last week, Friday, I called you at the same time. And I apologize. I should have learned and called you at a different time. But while I have you real quick, I did promise to call you back. That's what I'm doing. And the reason for my call is, boom. And I gave her my value proposition. She said, wow, this is amazing. I'd love to talk. This is exactly the type of technology that we're looking for. And so I created an active cycle, and she became one of the 70% of the meetings. And again, most people probably would have never called that person back.
Yeah, and that's the tragedy, right? When you look at this follow-up math, you see how powerful it is, Chad. It's a motivation to do something that doesn't come naturally to us, which is to have a second conversation with somebody who has said maybe no or not now to us on the first conversation. And, an awful lot of no's are really not now. People don't love being interrupted. And often they'll say no, they'll push back on you just because you interrupted them. When you call them back, that's one of the things that's magical. And you're lucky enough to get a hold of them, and your luck improves, as we see, by a factor of 2.56. Just in the terms of getting a hold of them, they're about twice as likely to set a meeting with you, partially because they've heard your voice before, partially because you were decent enough to actually persist, you cared enough, partially because you had something to talk to them about, which is what happened on the previous conversation. And I remember listening to that recording of yours. You actually said, oh yeah, I caught you on a Friday before. I've got to learn. You took the hit, you threw yourself under the bus. And she laughed, and that's really where the rapport happened that got the conversation going.
Yeah, empathy. I think Townsend Wardlaw did a post on this recently, and he said the one skill that will be important through the transition to AI in the next couple of years is the ability to have empathy. So, all right, let's look below the line. So above the line here, you see that the yield is higher. What does that mean in terms of dollars to your business, right? At the end of the day, as the CEO of my company, that's great that you have more conversations and your follow-up yield is 2 times better. As a rep, you should care about that, especially if you're an SDR. I've heard one of our friends say, if you're not cheating, you're not trying. And to me, this is an ideal sales hack or, cheat that you can use. But what does that mean to the owner of the business, Chris?
Well, we'll look at this little case study. This happens to be us, and our estimated value of a meeting is about $3,750. Yours is different, whatever it is you're selling. If you want a rule of thumb, really easy. You take your average contract value for the first deal. You go ahead and just divide that by 100. You'll come pretty close to your value of a conversation. And from that, you can back into the value of a dial if you know your dial to connect ratio. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do. So ours is about $3,750 per meeting. About 1 in 10 of our meetings is going to become a deal. About 1 in 5 become a test drive, and half of those become deals. And now it gets dramatic, right? So the value per dial on the follow-ups is $51.19. And that's just simple multiplication. And the value of a dial for cold calls is still pretty good, $9.79. Although, frankly, if you were making manual dials, which a lot of people do, they tend to cost about $7 each. So at $7 of investment, you're getting $9.79 back. That same $7 of investment could be yielding $51.19 in our case. And that's just, that's a big difference. And as you follow that over to the right, you'll see that in the month of October, we've produced about $1.32 million of value from our follow-ups. And even though we had many more cold calls, but almost 3 times as many, 2.5 times as many, those only produced $637,000 of value. So a lot more value was created from the follow-ups. And then when you look at the total cost, the labor, and we pretended like we were a regular connect and sell customer, so paying ourselves our dial fees at list is a little unrealistic and that normally most people at the scale would be paying a little less than list. But you look at it, the cost is also lower for the follow-ups. They're only 28% of the cost. And so the ROI is tremendously higher. So the ROI on a cold call, still decent, 751%. Seen worse things in the world. But the ROI on a follow-up dial, 4,351%. Again, your mileage would vary here, but it's the relative difference between those two that makes a difference.
Wow. I mean, it's just math, right? I mean, it always comes down to numbers. And if you're not a data-driven company, I mean, look at the growth of sales enablement. The Sales Enablement Society right now is looking at things like this. So if you're part of the Sales Enablement Society and you're in this webinar and you want to learn these, understanding the math, reach out to Chris. I'm sure that he'd be happy to talk with you. So Chris, I think this unpacks the data even a little bit further. Can you share what this table shares?
Yeah, my guess is nobody else has ever bothered to analyze this before. These eye charts sometimes drive people a little bit crazy, but I decided to take a week of calling and just take it and divide it into two pieces, which was conversations that were cold, conversations that were follow-ups. And I was really looking at the conversations, not even the dials. So that extra hidden multiple from the dials is missing here. But I wanted to see, does this follow-up magic, this math, does it affect every outcome of every conversation? Well, it certainly affects the outcome called meeting scheduled. As you see, the follow-ups are 4.65 times more likely for this little sample, different sample. But even as you come down, and of course, each one of these conversation outcomes is either positive or negative. So if they're negative, then decreasing the number makes it is a good thing. If they're positive, increasing the number. It's like prospect hung up. Take a look down on the fifth row. It says prospect hung up. For the cold calls, 246 of them, or 10.61% hung up. But for the follow-up conversations, and these weren't with people who agreed to be called. These are just people who'd answered the phone before and had a conversation before. Well, of course, there are people who stay on more. I don't think the reps did anything different here. Prospect just didn't hang up because they were less likely to hang up. This is what I mean by the hidden power of this follow-up math. It's hidden. We don't think about the fact that if I talk to somebody and they stayed on the phone with me before, their habit is to stay on the phone with people more likely. It's not one for one, it's all statistics. But when you look down, every single category of conversation outcome is improved from 465% for the one you care the most about, just meeting schedule, all the way down to the little tiny ones like busy callback laters, which only had a 3.69% improvement, but it's still an improvement. So when you really look at it, no matter whether you look at it in the large, from dials to conversations to meetings, or you even go crazy like I did here, and you break it down into little teeny tiny pieces, you're going to find out that conversations that are second or beyond, after you've had a first conversation, everything gets better.
Well, Chris, I think notice the .ai and ScaleX. What I've discovered over the course of the past several years in running inside sales teams is that even as the acting manager, when I have a great sales ops person, a business analyst, sales operations, a trainer, all of the above, it's extremely challenging when humans are in the loop to ensure that these follow-up calls are actually put into the list in an optimal way. The reason I bring that up is because I believe that with the power of AI, and honestly, it's very, very light AI. We've had some meetings recently in Philadelphia with an AI machine learning expert who sells $1 million implementations of AI and machine learning. And he looked at me crooked and thought that I was crazy to be asking such a simple task, which is, let's just, for instance, a sales rep talks to somebody that hangs up on them and they decide to put that person in a not interested, no reason given, and schedules no follow-up task. Well, why doesn't the system change the status of that prospect or create a future follow-up task in an automated way, right? By using the power of computing now, you can do what the rep should have done in the first place, which was disposition the record in a certain way. And that's how you, I believe, coupling AI with the human in the loop is how you're going to get these kinds of yields and ensure that the machine and the engine is built to deliver these kinds of promises, right? Chris Beall runs a very tight organization, and he has people and managers who ensure that these results are tracked closely. I believe that there's a big room for sales enablement in the cloud, sales analysts in the cloud. And it's very important that when you build a machine like this, that all the right pieces and players are involved to make sure that you get these outcomes.
Absolutely, Chad. I mean, where we are right now is we've gotten to the cusp of a revolution. And, we've been in a revolution for a while about speed, just have lots more conversations. And what we found is it's easy to amplify suck. So then we got into, and I'm not going to say quality, because even though it is quality, it's not what people normally think of, which is the quality of going slow and cherry picking. It's quality at speed. What can you do with the flow? What can you do with the processes to make a difference? And it turns out then you come up against the limits of what humans will do. The Iron Man suit in sales doesn't make you physically stronger. It makes you emotionally more neutral. That's what it really does, is it allows the right decisions to be made based on the math, so that you're not just guessing all the time, because your guesses will tend to go in the direction of what makes me feel good. And what makes you feel good in sales tends not to be what makes the big numbers happen.
You know what it reminds me of? If for anybody who doesn't know, Chris was a card counter, and I hope I'm allowed to say that publicly. I've heard him say it many times, so now it's out there. And when you're in Vegas, Chris, and you see a hard 6 that the dealer has, and you have a let's just say an 11, what are you supposed to do on that hand?
I'm pretty sure I'm going to double down in that question, Chad.
All right. So I think that one's easy for most people. Now let's take it to a little bit harder decision. The dealer has a 2 and you have a 12. That's a hard 12. What do you do?
It depends on the count. Right? There's a count above which I'm going to stand, and there's a count, or I'm going to hit, actually, and there's one below which I'm going to stand. And it's all developed. Actually, that was kind of an original AI correlation kind of thing, although this is hard math, not soft math. But, you've got to know how to make all the plays. And I think that's a great point, Chet. This chart kind of shows you there's a lot of plays other than scheduling the meeting, right? Which was that 11 against the 6, right? And I learned as a young counter, I was trained by one of the best card counters in the world, who will remain nameless. And he said, Chris, the key is to make every play right. Don't get sloppy. And I used to practice several hours a day because I didn't have AI, and they didn't let you take it into the shop anyway. You kind of went into the casino by yourself, right? You had to stick the AI in your head. But the fact is, you had to make every play. You had to make every play. And that play, that no interest, no reason play, is just as important as the meeting scheduled play if you want to optimize across your entire portfolio, which is how I thought about card counting and how I think about conversations.
So everyone listening today, you heard it here. Make every play the right play, and that's what you do by automating these processes and ensuring that your reps make every play the right play. So let's wrap up with how do you do it. So, again, it took me a while to figure out that this was the right play as a sales professional. And so what Janie Wall at Connect and Sell taught me to do as the leader of the team is, number one, you just have to use the dispositions properly, right? Define them and then make sure everybody knows what they are. I think Chris and I talked recently on a webinar, and the answer is probably 8 to 10 dispositions. You probably don't need too many more than that. You probably don't need too many less than that. But 8 to 10 dispositions, make sure you use them. And then make sure you're scheduling the follow-ups. Again, if your reps aren't doing it, the best way to do it, inspect what you expect. So at the end of the week, how many conversations resulted in busy, call back later, interest, call back later, interest, send information, all of those that you see there, how many follow-ups were scheduled against those? And the Janie Wall of your vendor, I suspect, can help you run a quick report that shows you how many follow-ups were scheduled and how many weren't. And you can quickly drive the behavior to schedule more follow-ups. And then make sure that you log meaningful notes when you're running these follow-ups, because the worst thing that you can do is a follow-up without meaningful notes. So take good notes, make sure you have a call to action, refer to the date you talked to them last, and bring up something that you talked about last time, right? Maybe it was snowing or raining or hail, weather related, or maybe there was just an acquisition or who knows what. And then just load the list, click the button, have conversations with people at scale, personalized follow-ups. So this is exactly what I mean. Call notes, what happened as a result of the call, and then your follow-up teleprompter, right? What are you going to say the next time? Automate these processes, be personal, follow up, and that's how you can get to the math that Chris talked about today. So if you want to reach us, again, thank you for attending this session today. My name is Chad Burmeister. I'm the CEO of ScaleX.ai. My Twitter handle is ScaleXAI, LinkedIn/Chad Burmeister, or you can reach me at chad@scalex.ai. And Chris Beall's information is here. He's at chris.beall@connectandcell.com. Chris,
Yeah.
any final thoughts?
The only one, Chad, which is, hey, you want to learn more about this? Follow up with us.